All right, continuing from that last video about some of the quotation marks new pressure VEGITO can do and the workarounds for the nerfs that came with the buffs. So the basic idea of the last video, was going off again, this sort of VEGITO sweet spot mid-screen, that position mid-screen where at a far orb, where a far orb can hit at a similar distance to that, you could do that same spazzy normal, the spazzy stand medium normal, or a stand hard. The medium at this range, it lets you go to the double orb pressure stuff and all the other stuff that comes from that range. The hard from this range lets us do the quotation marks, safe Banshee Blast stuff. Also, we could just keep on doing orb to sassy kick, rinse and repeat from this distance. At this range, we have just regular Banshee Blast stuff, whether or not it's a Banshee Blast install stuff or, a regular old Banshee Blast bait to final Kamehameha, whatever it is, right? And then we also have that falling Banshee Blast stuff. How realistic it is in this version, it's a little bit iffy, quite specific, but technically, it's still there. Also, while we're doing all this, of course, remember all the past videos. Everything still applies, what I said before. Nothing is 100% guaranteed. The idea is just to make all of this as realistic as we can as possible. So we're going to be using the bug with fireballs where you can make it so the opponent cannot homing dash out of or reflect out of it in the same manner as normally as possible to make all of this stuff as safe as realistically possible, even if they were to try to get out of it, right? So we are covering ourselves wherever we can, and then we just kind of rinse and repeat, loop into this pressure stagger, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so you got it. Pretty simple. Because, although people are complaining that you can't double orb anymore, hopefully that you saw from that last video, you actually can. You just do it in the reverse way. And what's more, it actually works from that VEGITO sweet spot that I've showed mid-screen. So that is exactly where you would be looping this potential pressure in the first place. You're just switching in and out what you're actually staggering with, right? So really the only thing that you lost, in a sense, is the double orb to save Banshee Blast, or the reset stand medium, and that also doubled as that falling Banshee Blast stuff. But anyway, there's workarounds. Hopefully you get that. So anyway, besides that, some other notes to mention. Something curious that I've never seen mentioned before is from these setups, that I've been showing where you can get a +4 or a +5 overhead, from some of these stagger resets. One of the things I showed you could do this from is the Spirit Sword version. So something I've never seen mentioned before is that besides obviously having some new versions of it from the stand medium, before, again, I've never saw this mentioned before actually, did you know that versus some characters on block, Spirit Sword was not -5, but it was actually -3 because of the way that, hurt boxes and hit boxes interacted with each other. But now, actually, because of the momentum, the carryover momentum from stand medium, if you do a stand medium to a 2L, downlight, whatever you want to call it, this works about versus half the cast. This also now works versus Spirit Sword. To a Spirit Sword, I should say. And what's more, it also changes the frames on this. So an example of Trunks. Normally Trunks is -5, or you're -5 when you do this, but now when you do this setup, you're only -2. Kind of a Mamichishiki kind of thing, but hey, there it is. Anyway, something else that might be thought of is how much do character differences between standing and ducking matter? Generally speaking, it actually doesn't matter that drastically from this, only very slightly. And, for double orb stuff, neutral, mid-screen, whatever, to save Banshee Blast stuff, it is more lenient on a ducking opponent, but generally speaking, you're always ducking when you're going to block anyway. And if you're not versus the computer and you're actually just playing in a real match and holding back, the guy would slightly move back forward if they were to try to stay and block. So that would save that slight pixel that might fuck this up in the first place, right? So character differences and everything like that don't play a huge part in this. Some characters are a little bit more iffy, you know what I mean? But generally speaking, the general idea is very simple and it works for, generally speaking, everybody. You know what I mean? Besides a little bit of timing for some characters. Anyway, another thing, although I thought maybe it might have been obvious from last video, is when you're resetting your stagger pressure in the first place, this doesn't have to be from a medium. It works from a light or a light to light auto combo, whatever. You can do double orb stuff from that. It works from that normal distance that you're normally staggering a light in the first place. Double orb stuff all works there. It works to all the loop pressure, you know, that you're comboing into in and out of overhead, whatever it might be. Orb to sassy kick, resetting it to the mid-screen sweet spot where you can Banshee Blast stuff. Stand medium back to double orb. So it works from that. It doesn't have to be a stand medium. It works from lights too. And it's even more lenient on a standing opponent. On the few standing opponents that this is kind of can be iffy on, I guess, if you were playing the computer that doesn't slightly walk back when they block for a second, right? But anyway, speaking of getting back into the sweet spot, maybe it's not obvious, but what happens if your opponent were to try to reflect out of any of this pressure at some point? Well, it just so happens that, you know, at most normal points where someone might try to reflect out of this, well, that technically does just put you back to the sweet spot, since you just get pushed out to that pretty much exact range in the first place, where your stand medium just barely hits, or the 2 medium, down light medium, down medium, whatever the fuck it's called, whatever the community calls this shit. You know what, you can just go back in the double orb stuff, falling Banshee Blast stuff to switch it up from this range, the range where the hard to orb works. Save Banshee Blast stuff, blah, 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 blah. Keep saying it. So, you know, I guess if the opponent did happen to reflect, you know, it's reasonable to think that the opponent might reflect at some point, you know, besides just having the obvious momentum of his normals in the first place. That momentum where you're doing the normal from now is the sweet spot. So it loops all back into this, even if the opponent was reflecting. And I guess, again, I'll show a falling Banshee Blast thing here, since although, you know, setups for it now are pretty iffy, technically, it works from this. So I guess, you know, theoretically, if you had used most of your normals now, that would definitely probably be a place where you would then go for a falling Banshee Blast thing, because you got to get your normals back, right? So, I guess besides that, you know, what do you do if you're exactly straight up in the opponent's junk and you can't do a double orb actually? I don't know, same normal stuff applies. I mean, you could still do the whole run through the whole gambit of every normal you have, and then after you duck hard, down hard, too hard, whatever the fuck it's called, you know, you could do a Banshee Blast or a homing dash. You know, you got to mix it up because it's not actually real, you know what I mean? So you could do that. Or if you just did after the 2L, do the overhead. You know what I mean? You're at 0. Because of momentum after the stand medium now, if you do the orb after the stand medium, you know, it's actually only -2 in between, not a -3. You can't too hard anyway, either or, but I guess you're like, you get an extra frame now. So, or I guess you would just end to a regular sassy kick at some point, but you know, you wouldn't be at that theoretical sweet spot, sadly, but you know, it is what it is. But anyway, remember, if you like these videos, like, sub, silly, comment, share if you want to support the channel. I don't know what else to say. I feel like a lot of this stuff is pretty obvious. It's kind of weird that people, I guess they just never tried. I guess maybe they thought, I guess they just never tried. They're like, oh, we can't do double orb. We're not even going to try to figure it out. I don't know. Very strange to me. But hey, well, what are you going to do? What can I say? I did it. I'm too good for my own good, I guess.